"You have 30 minutes to pack your things and be gone," her husband said, and he didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. Vivienne Harlow stood at the entrance of the boardroom, 12 people watching her, and the silence was the kind that has weight to it. She could feel it pressing against her chest. Across the long oak table, seated at the head the chair her grandfather had sat in for 40 years, was her husband of 7 years, Griffin Cole. He wore the navy suit she had helped him pick out for exactly this kind of meeting. His expression was professional, detached, like she was a contractor whose invoice had come in over budget. "On what basis?" Vivienne asked. Griffin slid a folder down the table without standing up. "Misconduct. Breach of fiduciary duty. Creating a hostile environment for the executive team." He finally looked at her. "It's all documented." She didn't reach for the folder. She knew what was in it. She had seen a draft 2 months ago, tucked inside a folder Griffin had left open on his laptop when he stepped away to take a call. She had stood in their kitchen in her socks and read every fabricated line of it, and then she had closed the laptop and poured herself a glass of water and stood at the window for a long time, watching the snow come down over the Ottawa River. "This is completely out of order," said Hugh Larkin, her head of operations, from his seat near the middle of the table. He was one of 3 people in that room who looked genuinely disturbed by what was happening. "Vivienne built this division from the ground up. Her performance record is—" "Your concern is noted," Griffin said. He turned back to Vivienne. 30 minutes, starting now." She looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable. This man she had loved, this man she had introduced to her family at her grandmother's kitchen table in Gatineau. This man who had, for the past 14 months, been sleeping with Sloan Mercer, the company's head of external affairs, who was sitting 3 chairs down from him right now with her hands folded on the table and her eyes carefully pointed at the wall. Vivienne could have said everything. She could have told all 12 people in that room exactly what she knew. She could have destroyed the carefully arranged tableau in about 45 seconds. But that was not the plan. "I have nothing to say," she told him, "except that I hope you've thought this through very carefully, Griffin." Something moved behind his eyes. It was fast, but she caught it. Then Sloan touched his arm and whatever she'd seen closed off again. 30 minutes, he repeated. Vivienne nodded once. She turned and walked out. Her heels were quiet on the carpeted hallway. The office around her kept moving, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the low hum of 200 people going about their Thursday. And then, one by one, things slowed as people looked up and understood what they were seeing. Word traveled the way it always did in a building like this, fast and ahead of the facts. Her assistant, a sharp young man named Theodore who'd been with her for 3 years and knew without being told what was happening, met her at her desk with a small cardboard box already in his hands. His face was very controlled but his jaw was tight. "Don't," Vivienne said gently. "I'm all right." "You shouldn't have to be," he said. She patted his arm once and began placing things in the box. A photograph she'd already replaced with a duplicate, a coffee mug, 2 pens. She had cleared out anything that actually mattered weeks ago, a few things at a time, carried in her tote bag on mornings when Griffin had already left for the gym. Her actual files were backed up at home and on a secure server her lawyer had set up. Her personal work, a decade of strategy documents, client relationships, institutional knowledge was already somewhere safe. She was packing theater. 2 security guards she recognized, both visibly uncomfortable, appeared at the edge of her desk. "Mrs. Cole," one of them said, "we've been asked to—" "I know," she said pleasantly. "Let's go." As they walked her toward the elevator, she passed Griffin's glass-walled office. He was on the phone, laughing. Sloan was perched on the edge of his credenza, one hand resting on his shoulder, watching Vivienne pass with an expression that was trying hard to be neutral, and wasn't quite managing it. Vivienne looked straight ahead. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside with her small box and her dignity entirely intact, and the doors closed behind her, and she descended from the 14th floor of Harlow Meridian Group, the company her grandfather had founded in 1974, the company her mother had run for 22 years before her, the company that Griffin had always referred to as our company with a sense of ownership Vivienne had found, at the time, endearing. There was one thing Griffin did not know, one thing he had somehow missed in all of his planning, all of his document drafting, all of his quiet conversation with Sloan about what came next. Vivienne's mother had not left the company to Griffin, she had left it to Vivienne. 62% held in a family trust with conditions her mother's lawyer had spent the better part of 3 years crafting. The trust activated under 2 circumstances: if someone attempted to remove Vivienne from leadership without cause, or if evidence of serious misconduct by a company officer was discovered and documented. Her mother, Eunice Harlow, had been many things. She had been demanding and exacting and occasionally impossible, but she had been brilliant, and she had loved her daughter with a ferocity that expressed itself mostly through preparation. When Vivian was 17, Enos had told her, "The people who love you will make sure you don't need to be rescued." She had not fully understood what that meant until she was sitting in a law office on Elgin Street at 7 in the morning in yesterday's clothes, her eyes red, asking a man named Raymond O.C. to explain to her exactly what her mother had built. 8 months earlier, Vivian had come home from a week-long site visit in Halifax to surprise Griffin with dinner from the restaurant where they'd had their first date. She'd brought the good wine. She'd been thinking about him on the flight back, thinking they'd been too distant lately, too busy. Two people orbiting the same house without ever really landing. The apartment was quiet when she got in. Griffin's jacket was on the hook. His shoes were by the door. She called his name, no answer. She found his phone on the kitchen counter, screen face down. She didn't think anything of it. She started unpacking the takeout, and then she heard his phone buzz several times in quick succession, and she glanced over and the screen lit up with a name, Sloan. She set down the container she was holding. She did not pick up his phone. She did not need to. She had been watching Sloan Mercer for 4 months by then, noticing the way Griffin went still when her name came up in meetings, the slight change in his voice, the way he'd stopped mentioning her the way he used to, casually, in passing, and had started not mentioning her at all. Vivian knew the geography of her own husband well enough to read the negative space. She had been waiting to be wrong. She put the food in the fridge and opened a bottle of wine and sat at the kitchen table and thought very clearly, for a long time. When Griffin came out of the study 20 minutes later, his expression shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible. "You're home early," he said. "I caught an earlier flight," she said. "Hungry?" They ate dinner. It was fine. It was terrible. That night, after he fell asleep, Vivian went into the guest room and called Raymond O.C., her mother's lawyer, and left him a message at 11:30 at night asking if he could meet with her in the morning. He called back at 7. She was already dressed. "Tell me about the trust," she said when she sat down across from him. "Tell me all of it, not the summary version." Raymond had known her since she was a child. He looked at her carefully over his reading glasses. "You've found something, tell me about the trust," he told her. It took the better part of an hour. Her mother, who had never fully trusted Griffin's ambition, he wants to own things, Viv not build them, had structured the estate with the kind of quiet precision that only reveals itself when it's needed. On paper, the company had passed to both of them, joint stewardship. In reality, Vivian held a controlling interest through a trust that Griffin had never been told the full details of, and that interest came with teeth. "What do I need to do?" Vivian asked. "Document everything," Raymond said. "Every instance of misconduct, every irregularity, and then wait. The moment he tries to remove you from the company, the trust activates fully. At that point, you are the majority owner. You can call an emergency board meeting. You can remove him." She had nodded. Then she had driven home, and she had walked into the kitchen, and she had stood at the window for a very long time. The months that followed were the strangest of Vivian's life. She hired an investigator named Caitlin Burgess, a former RCMP officer who specialized in corporate fraud and had been recommended by Raymond with the kind of quiet certainty that meant he had used her before and trusted her completely. Caitlin was methodical and thorough and almost entirely without warmth, which Vivian found deeply reassuring. What Caitlin found went beyond the affair. Griffin had been redirecting consulting fees. Small amounts at first, routed through a numbered company in New Brunswick that had no employees and no clients, and no existence beyond a registration number and a bank account he controlled. Over 3 years, those small amounts had added up to somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.4 million. He had also been quietly dismantling things. Programs Vivian's mother had cared about, the community investment portfolio, the mentorship pipeline for young women in finance, the pro bono advisory work with Indigenous-owned businesses. Not eliminating them outright because that would have drawn attention. Just defunding them, rerouting their budgets, letting them quietly starve. When Vivian understood the full scope of what he'd been doing, she sat in Caitlin's office and was very still for a long moment. "Are you all right?" Caitlin asked. "Yes," Vivian said. Then, more honestly, "Not even a little bit." She told only 2 people outside of Raymond Caitlin. One was her older brother Everett, who reacted by wanting to confront Griffin immediately and had to be talked off the ledge in a 20-minute phone call. The other was her closest friend, a woman named June Okoro, who had known Vivian since university and who listened to the whole story in silence and then said, simply, "Tell me what you need from me. I need you to not let me fall apart," Vivian said. "I can do that," June said. For 8 months, Vivian went to work and performed normalcy. She attended meetings. She reviewed budgets. She smiled at Sloan Mercer in the hallway with a pleasantness that cost her something real every single time. She went home and had dinner with Griffin and asked about his day. She was meticulous and patient, and privately, underneath all of it, She was building a case that Raymond described toward the end as the most airtight thing I've seen in 30 years of practice. She waited for Griffin to move. She knew he would. He had been positioning for it for months. The slow accumulation of allies on the board, the quiet conversations about new strategic direction, the way he had started referring to Harlow Meridian as his company in external interviews without Vivienne noticing, or so he thought. The folder appeared on a Monday morning. The fabricated complaints, the manufactured documentation, the performance review that bore no resemblance to any performance review she had actually received in 7 years. She read every page. She went home that night and told June over the phone, "He's going to do it soon. Are you ready?" "Yes," she said. And then the next morning she walked into the boardroom and let it happen. She sat in her car in the parking garage for 12 minutes after the security guards left. Just sat there, her hands on the wheel, looking at the concrete wall in front of her. Then she called Raymond. "It happened," she said. "I know. I already received the notification from the board secretary." His voice was calm and precise, the way it always was. "The activation filing will be submitted within the hour. Emergency board meeting is set for tomorrow morning at 9. Griffin will receive formal notification tonight." "And Caitlin?" "She's already been in contact with the Ontario Securities Commission. The financial crimes documentation has been submitted. They'll be in touch with you tomorrow as well." Vivienne took a breath. One long breath, in and out. "The divorce papers? Ready when you are." She thanked him and ended the call. She drove to June's house instead of going home. June opened the door, took one look at her, and pulled her into the kind of hug that doesn't require explanation. They sat on June's back porch with tea, even though it was cold enough that their breath was visible, because Vivienne needed the cold air. She needed to feel something real and simple. "He texted me," Vivienne said, looking at her phone, 40 minutes after I left. "Tough day but necessary. No hard feelings. Call if you need anything. Don't answer it." "I wasn't going to." "Good. Let him think tonight is his victory. Tomorrow morning is yours." Vivienne set her phone face down on the table and looked out at the dark yard. Her mother had died 2 years ago, a swift and ruthless illness that had taken her in 6 months. There were still days when Vivienne reached for the phone to call her, had actually dialed the first 3 digits before remembering. She wanted to call her now. "I figured it out, Mayman. I understood what you built. I'm not going to let anyone take it." She arrived at Harlow Meridian the next morning at 8:45. She wore the gray wool blazer that had been her mother's, the one she kept for occasions that required more than ordinary steadiness. Her hair was clean and pinned back. She had barely slept, but she looked like she had. The security guard at the front desk went pale when he saw her. "Mrs. Cole, your access was, your credentials. Check your system," she said, not unkindly. "You should have updated instructions as of this morning." He looked at his screen. The color returned to his face, replaced by something that read very much like relief. "Of course. Go right ahead, Mrs. Cole." She took the elevator to 14. The boardroom was already filling. Raymond was there, along with 5 board members who had received ceasing notices the night before. Vivienne had spoken personally with 3 of them. She walked in, settled into the chair at the head of the table, and waited. At 8:58 she heard Griffin's voice in the hallway, confident, slightly too loud, the way it always was when he was performing for an audience. Then she heard it stop. Through the glass wall she watched him see the boardroom, watched him see the board members, watched him see her at the head of the table. His face went very still. He came in anyway. Griffin Cole was not a man who backed down from rooms. "What's this?" he said. "I didn't call a board meeting." "I did," Vivienne said. He looked at her the way you look at something that has suddenly appeared where there was nothing before. "You don't have the authority." "She does, actually." Raymond stood. "Mr. Cole, I need to inform you of a significant update to the ownership structure of Harlow Meridian Group, effective as of this morning." He slid a folder across the table. When Enos Harlow passed, the majority of her shares, 62%, were placed in a family trust for her daughter Vivienne Harlow Cole. That trust had specific activation conditions. As of yesterday, when you terminated Vivienne's employment without cause, those conditions were met. Griffin's face had gone the color of old paper. "That's not. We were 50-50. That was the arrangement. That was what you were told," Raymond said. "The actual documentation reflects something quite different. Ines Harlow was very particular about what she left in whose hands." Something shifted in Griffin's expression. Vivienne watched it happen, watched the understanding land and then the calculation, and then underneath both of those things, something that looked very much like fear. He looked at her. Really looked at her, possibly for the first time in years. "You knew," he said. "It was barely a question. When I fired you yesterday. You already knew." "I've known for 8 months, she said. "Since the night I came home from Halifax and figured it out." The room was very quiet. I'd like to call for a formal vote, Vivian said, turning to face the board, to remove Griffin Cole as CEO of Harlow Meridian Group, effective immediately, on the grounds of financial misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and misuse of company resources. She opened the folder in front of her and began to distribute copies of Caitlin's documentation, bank statements, shell company registrations, falsified invoices, email correspondence. I've also submitted all relevant materials to the OSC and to our auditors. The numbers are documented and verified. Griffin pushed his chair back. This is fabricated, you can't. The Securities Commission doesn't think so, she said. They've been very attentive. He went silent. All in favor of the removal motion? Raymond said. Every hand at the table went up. Every hand except Griffin's. Raymond's voice was level. Griffin Cole is removed as CEO of Harlow Meridian Group as of this moment. You are asked to surrender all company devices and access credentials. Security will escort you from the building. Griffin stood. For one long moment he looked at Vivienne across the table. This woman who had loved him, who had built a life with him, who had spent 7 years giving this company and this marriage everything she had. And he looked at her like he was trying to find the seam in her. Some way she must have cheated to end up on the other side of this. He didn't find it, because there wasn't one. 30 minutes, Vivienne said quietly. That's what you gave me yesterday. I'm extending you the same courtesy. He walked out without another word. The weeks that followed were not a triumph. They were work. There were calls with the OSSC every other day. There were board briefings and audit reports and legal filings that required her attention in the mornings before her staff arrived. There were 14 employees who came forward to Hugh with accounts of Griffin's conduct, the dismissiveness, the intimidation, the way he'd treated people who pushed back as problems to be managed rather than voices to be heard. Vivienne met with each of them personally. She sat across from them and listened and did not try to explain or minimize. This should not have happened here, she told a young analyst named Zara who had spent 2 years afraid to raise a concern. I can't undo it. But I want you to know that this company is going to be somewhere different from here on. Zara had been quiet for a moment. I thought about leaving so many times, she said. I love this work, I just couldn't stand. She stopped. You shouldn't have had to make that calculation, Vivienne said. She restructured immediately. She brought Hugh into a chief operations role with real authority. She hired an external ethics consultant to run independent listening sessions. She created an anonymous reporting channel that went directly to Raymond's firm, so that concerns couldn't be buried by anyone in leadership, including herself. The divorce proceedings began the same week Griffin was removed. Her lawyer, a woman named Priscilla Thorne who had practiced family law in Ottawa for 25 years and had the kind of reputation that made opposing counsel visibly adjust their body language, called it uncomplicated. Your grandfather's estate was held separately before marriage. Your mother's trust was never marital property. There's a prenuptial agreement that Griffin signed. I have the original. And given the documented misconduct and infidelity, we're in an exceptionally strong position. What will he claim? He'll try for spousal support. His earnings capacity has been substantially impaired. A pause. He's been removed from a CTO role and is currently under investigation by securities regulators. His options are limited. The settlement meeting took place in Priscilla's boardroom. Griffin came with a lawyer who looked younger than Zara. He looked terrible. The confident set of his shoulders was gone. He looked like a man who had been carrying a very heavy story for a long time and had finally had to put it down. He looked at Vivienne across the table and said, "Can we just talk? Without all of this?" "No," she said. "Vivienne, everything goes through our lawyers. You made it professional. So did I." He was quiet for a moment. "I know I hurt you. You stole from my mother's company," she said. "From the people who worked there. From the clients who trusted us. Don't reduce it to hurting me." He didn't say anything else. The settlement was as minimal as the law allowed. He kept his car and his personal things and walked away with enough to start over somewhere, if he chose to. He signed quickly. His hand shook. She felt nothing watching him sign. She had expected to feel something. Grief or even just relief. What she felt was mostly the absence of weight. Like setting down something she had carried so long she'd stopped noticing it. The OSC investigation moved quickly. The evidence was clean and comprehensive, the kind of case that prosecutors describe as a gift. Griffin was charged with securities fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. His lawyer negotiated hard, but the weight of documentation left very little room. He was eventually sentenced to 22 months in a federal facility and ordered to repay the full $1.4 million, plus interest and administrative penalties. His professional certifications were revoked. His name disappeared from financial industry directories within a week of the verdict. Vivienne watched the sentencing on the news from June's living room. June poured them both a glass of wine and sat down beside her and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. "Is it enough?" June asked eventually. I don't know, Vivian said honestly. It doesn't feel like anything, really. It just feels like done. Done is something, she agreed. Sloane Mercer had quietly resigned 2 weeks after Griffin's removal. She reappeared 6 months later at a firm in Calgary. Vivian didn't follow what happened next. It didn't seem important. What was important was the company. What was important was the work. Harlow Meridian had always been good at the technical side of things. Investment strategy, client advisory, portfolio management. Under her mother, it had also been a company with a genuine sense of what it was for. Under Griffin, that second thing had quietly eroded. Vivian spent the next year building it back. She restored the community investment portfolio and tripled its funding. She relaunched the mentorship program with a proper budget and proper staff. She expanded the advisory work with Indigenous-owned businesses into a dedicated division with 3 full-time advisors and a mandate to grow. Your mother used to say that capital without conscience just accelerates existing inequalities. Hugh told her during one of their weekly check-ins. He'd worked with Enos for 15 years. You sound like her sometimes. Is that a good thing? It's the best thing, he said. The culture began to change. Slowly, and then faster. People started talking to each other in meetings rather than waiting to see which way Griffin, or whoever Griffin had appointed, wanted the conversation to go. There were disagreements that got worked out in rooms rather than in whisper networks. Someone put a suggestion box in the break room on the 3rd floor as a joke, and then people actually started using it. 8 months after taking over, Vivian received an industry recognition for ethical leadership. She accepted it with a short speech that thanked her team and her mother and said nothing about Griffin at all. Afterward, at the reception, an older woman she didn't know well came up to her and said, "Your mother would have been so proud of you tonight." Vivian thanked her and excused herself to stand by the window for a moment. "I know, Maimon, I know." Her brother Everett had introduced her to Noel Adeyemi at a dinner party he'd hosted in the spring about 6 months after the sentencing. "He's decent," Everett had said beforehand with the particular awkwardness of an older brother attempting subtlety. "He's a civil engineer. He works on water infrastructure projects. He does not work in finance, which I thought you'd appreciate." "You're setting me up," she said. "I'm hosting a dinner party," he said. "He's one of 8 guests." Noel had come in out of the cold with snow on his shoulders and a bottle of wine and a joke about Ottawa winters that Everett's wife laughed at before Noel had finished making it. He sat across from Femme Vivienne at dinner and asked her real questions and actually listened to the answers. He did not mention Harlow Meridian. He did not mention the scandal. He talked about the dam rehabilitation project he was working on in Northern Ontario, and the way river systems respond to intervention in ways that models don't fully capture. And Vivienne found herself leaning forward because she was genuinely interested, which surprised her. They talked for 3 hours. At the end of the evening, Noel found her coat and helped her into it and said, "Everett tells me you make very good decisions. I think he might be underselling it." She laughed. "He told me you're decent. High praise from your brother. Can I take you for coffee sometime?" She said yes. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became a habit. The habit became something she started to depend on in the way she depended on things that were steady and real. Noel was easy to be with in a way she hadn't known to miss. He did not ask for performance. He did not keep score. He showed up when he said he would and asked nothing of her except her actual company. It took her a long time to trust it. She told him this directly, one evening when they'd been together for 5 months, and the conversation had gotten serious enough that honesty seemed necessary. "I don't fully know how to do this yet," she said. "I thought I was building a life and it turned out I was building something else. Something I didn't understand until I had to take it apart." "I know," Noel said. "I'm not asking you to know. I'm asking if you want to keep going." She thought about it seriously. "Yes," she said, "I want to keep going." They kept going. 2 years after the morning Vivienne walked out of Harlow Meridian with a box of decoys and a plan she'd spent 8 months building. She stood in the atrium of the company's newly expanded headquarters and looked out at the city. The renovation had taken 14 months. They had relocated the executive floor to a lower level, which had caused significant internal debate and which Vivienne had insisted on anyway, because leadership that's hard to reach isn't really leading. The atrium was open now, glass and wood, a fireplace along one wall that the staff had immediately taken over as a lunch spot. Hugh appeared beside her. The numbers from the impact division came in and, "We're ahead of projections by 30%. She nodded. It was good, it was very good, but it wasn't what she was thinking about. "Hugh," she said, "do you think she'd recognize it? The company, I mean." He didn't need to ask who she meant. "Yes and no," he said. "She'd recognize the heart of it, the rest of it," he considered. "The rest of it she might say you made better." Vivienne didn't respond right away. Her phone buzzed. A text from Noel, "Running late. See you at 7. I'm bringing dinner." She smiled. A week earlier she had found out she had been quietly nominated for a National Business Leadership Award, the kind her mother had received twice. Raymond had told her when he called to give her the news, and then he had paused on the line for a moment and said, "Ines would have been insufferably proud of you, you know. She would have made it impossible to have a humble moment about it for at least a year." Vivienne had laughed the real kind. "That's exactly right." She put her phone away. Around her the building was winding down for the evening, lights going off in the upper offices, people pulling on their winter coats in the lobby, a cluster of analysts arguing cheerfully about something near the elevator. Griffin was out of prison now. She knew this not because she had followed it but because Caitlin had sent her a brief note when his release date passed, in the way she sent all significant updates, informational, without editorializing. He had moved to another province. She had heard, through the kind of network that exists in every industry and pretends it doesn't, that he was working in an accounting role somewhere and keeping a low profile. She felt nothing particular about this. She had spent a long time expecting to feel something, victory, or relief, or at minimum some closing of a chapter that she could feel. What she had found instead was that the chapter had closed gradually, almost without her noticing, while she was busy doing other things, while she was rebuilding the community investment portfolio, while she was sitting across from Zara and the other 12 employees who had been afraid to speak, while she was at Noel's kitchen table on Sunday mornings, reading the paper while he made coffee and argued with the radio. The best outcome wasn't Griffin in a smaller life. The best outcome was that she had stopped needing it to mean anything. She turned away from the window. Her office was upstairs. She had a board report to finish before dinner. And after dinner she and Noel were going to look at a house in Westboro, the first they'd looked at together, a fact that had filled Everett with a satisfaction so obvious it had become a running joke at family dinners. She took the stairs. Her mother's blazer was still on the hook behind her office door. She wore it on the days that required something extra, and then she folded it carefully and put it back. There was something in that ritual she had come to value, the reminder that the steadiness she carried didn't come from nothing. It had been given to her, built into the structure of things long before she needed it. By a woman who had understood that the deepest form of love is to prepare someone for what you won't be there to see them through. The boardroom where Griffin had fired her was now used for quarterly culture reviews and the occasional team lunch. The chair at the head of the table was hers. It had always been hers. She just hadn't needed to use it until someone gave her a reason to.